Welcome to our podcast, Aging is a Trip, where we take a candid but lighthearted look at all aspects of aging and retirement. You'll learn some things, you'll be intrigued, and at times you'll even be amused. I'm your host, Brad Breeding, and for the last 10 years I've been the president of MyLifeSite.net, an online company that guides people through complex senior living decisions. Now, with this podcast, I want to help elevate society's perspectives and understanding of age-related matters, past, present, and future. Welcome to another podcast episode of Aging is a Trip. I am really excited about the guest that we have with us today, Dr. Harvey Austin. He is an internationally known surgeon. He has lived inside a 40-year inquiry of personal and humankind development. He's the author of Elders Rock, Don't Just Get Older, Become an Elder. It's an international bestseller. He has lectured globally and been interviewed by Oprah, Larry King, and Phil Donahue. He's retired. He and his wife, Arlene, have lived at Stone Ridge Retirement Community in Mystic, Connecticut for 2 years. He maintains that on the inside, no woman is ever older than 35 years of age. She is perpetually young and attractive. Each married before, and between them, they have 7 children, all grown, and give or take about 18 grandchildren. So, Dr. Austin, it's a pleasure to have you on the podcast with us today. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Brad. I'm really looking forward to this.
So I want to jump right in and start talking a little bit about some of the things that you wrote in your 2015 book, Elders Rock. I loved the book, and I was fascinated by your perspectives and explanations of what it really means to be an elder and the concept of elderhood, because most people associate that term elder with elderly, which tends to paint a mental picture of frailty. So tell us what it means to you to be an elder.
Oh, boy, that is such a great question. First of all, I think the world has always thought of human beings as having 3 different stages of life: youth, adult, and then elder. And the only one that deserves capitalization is elder with a capital E. And it's basically a stage that we've lost. You know, we've been on this planet for about 200,000 years, but for the last couple of thousand years, we've lost that 3rd stage, and it's happened because of the loss of family, because of the loss of tribe, and really, deep down, the loss of community. So as a result, what we have now, basically, is just a 2-stage life. The age of youth, which you could break up into young child and developing pre-adult, maybe teenagers, and adult. And it's adult forever. And we have lost that stage of wisdom that used to be known as the wise elder and worth capitalizing. So it's been unfortunate because we now have a world that's merely run by elders, a world run by adults without elder supervision.
Interesting. And so tell me then, why do you think we have lost that 3rd stage? What's happened to that elder stage? You mentioned the loss of or the family unit perhaps, and maybe some shrinking or distancing there, and the sort of aspect of tribal or community. Tell me kind of how that's been lost.
I think it's because we've lost the important teachers. It used to be that when you lived in a community, and let's just call that tribe, maybe a few hundred people, everybody knew you and you knew everybody. At that point, you were taught by 5 generations. You were taught by your grandparents, whom you lived with. You were taught by your parents, whom you lived with. You were taught by your cohort, all the other kids your age and young adults your age. And then you were taught by your children and eventually by your grandchildren. So we had the opportunity to be trained by 5 generations. Now, contrast that with the way it is right now. Who do we get trained by? Our parents. and not very well trained at that, because our parents were only trained by their parents. Yes, we get the school teachers that come on in, but they teach knowledge rather than wisdom, rather than how to live. So we've lost a whole lot when we lost that 5 generations of our teachers.
It makes sense. And so when we talk about elderhood, why do you feel like that is so critical to our species?
There's something very, very fascinating about our species, particularly about the female of that species that we call human being. It turns out that in every other species but ours, a very bizarre thing happens when the female loses the ability to produce young. And that bizarre thing is she dies. Even the species just that kind of lead up to us, the closest species, chimpanzees and gorillas, when the female no longer can produce young, she dies. We are the only species in the entire world that we know of whose female has another half lifetime yet to go after menopause. And it's the time when the children are all gone, they're off on their own, where the woman has the possibility of developing herself into what used to be known as the crone, which is a really good term, become kind of bad term now, but the wisdom of elderhood. And of course, that rubs off a little bit onto aging men as well, a few of whom become elders with a capital E.
So when we talk about community and everything that you just mentioned, how that ties into community over time, what is it about, I asked a moment ago why elderhood is so critical, but why is community so critical to us as a species? What is it about living in community that helps us to thrive as human beings?
Probably it was said best by, who was a woman who just ran for president last time and didn't get elected? Hillary Clinton, who said, it takes a village to raise a child. And I think she was, whether she knew it or not, she was referring to those 5 generations. How important it is to have sat on your grandmother's or grandfather's lap and had them tell a story about the way it was. See, that's one part of it. Here's the other part. When you consider that human beings have been on this planet long, long time, and we lived in tribe and small community during that period of time. We didn't travel very far. There were no airplanes. There was no cars. Oil wasn't a source of everything in our lives as it is now. And it was a more natural way. And people grew up within nature, not separate from nature. When we think of nature now, we think of, that out there. We don't think of ourselves as a part of nature, as a part of the great circle of life. So that in tribe, we could equally think of ourselves as 2-leggers, but we were in accord with the 4-leggers and the 8-leggers, the spiders, and the no-leggers, the snakes. We were all part of it, and we saw the seasons come and go. We weren't artificially kept away from the seasons by air conditioning and cars and transportation.
Well, that's a really fascinating point, what you said a moment ago, that we kind of think of nature as being out there, whereas there was a time where we were a part of nature. And so there's a close relationship or connection between living in community, being a part of a really a tight-knit community, and nature. And both of those things have sort of slipped out of our grasp, I guess, over the years.
Yes, and there's an interesting story. An anthropologist told me she was working with a very isolated tribe, and it took a long time for them to get used to her being there and asking questions. And at one point, when she was finally accepted, she talked to a man, And she asked him a very common question that you and I would ask: how do you like your neighbor? And the man she was talking to said, what are you talking about? She says, well, do you like your neighbor, or do you not like your neighbor? And it was for him a foreign question, and he answered it this way: how can you ask me that? He is my neighbor. The liking or the non-liking meant nothing. That neighborliness was an is and a necessity, and you knew your neighbor. You lived, within one another. There was this community, and that in turn lived within nature, and that in turn lived with, probably the best term would be, the Great Spirit that invaded all of this and was the basis for all of this. Community.
I love that. Yeah, I love it. And, as you're talking, I'm thinking about, the sort of the parallels between, say, the Industrial Revolution, which, of course, brought many, many, many welcome advances, but also, kind of pushed us out of that community to some degree, whether, with increased transportation and people living further distances from one another, and, with airplanes and highway travel and all the things that would just become more spread out and less community. And now it's almost like perhaps we're seeing that with technology as well. And so you kind of have to wonder what the continued adverse effects will be on community with all the technological advancements that we have today.
Yes, exactly. And you've just beautifully expressed what I call the paradox of modern times. We are at a place now that even without thinking, we enjoy the benefits of technology. I'm sitting here at my desk, looking at my computer, looking at my Scotch tape, looking at the bag of peanuts that comes, and looking at paper and my pens. Oh, and looking at my longevity. Right now we live 2 or 3 times the length of what we used to live back in times of tribe and community. But there's a downside to it as well, because as adults, we ask a childlike question called, can we do this? Can we develop atomic bombs? Can we live with atomic energy? And we no longer ask the elder question, well, yes, but should we? Should we? What's our future going to look like? Well, unfortunately, asking the mere adult question, can we, we've also developed the means for destroying our very nest, our very Gaia. So it's a double-edged sword. We may have taken adulthood as far as we possibly can, and without being wise enough as a species to enter into a new elderhood in the face of technology, our future may look dim indeed.
What drove you to want to speak out in whether it's writing in your book or other ways that you've done it, to kind of speak out on matters of aging and how that ties in to what we've been talking about here today?
I woke up one morning, and there's that wonderful space that you're in between asleep and awake that the psychologists call the hypnopompic space. And as I woke up, there was this huge message right there for me. And it was very simple. It says, bring back elder. And my response to that is, what? What's elder? What? Well, somehow I believed it. Bring back elder. And I thought, how the hell? I'm this young man named, not even young man, I was a middle-aged man named Harvey. What do you mean bring back elder? And the response from inside me, I guess, was, well, write a book. Okay. I wrote the book in 6 days. It had 50 pages, and most of the pages said, write a whole lot more here. And finally, 2 years later, there was a book about it. because I really had a lot of research to do. I didn't have a clue what elder was at the time. So that's how this whole thing came about. It's kind of like I wrote it because I had to. I don't know what to say. Bad.
It almost came to you in a dream. Close to it, right?
It almost came to me in a dream, right? It's almost like somebody printed it on the wall. Bring back elder. Well, it wasn't that, but almost like that. Yeah.
Well, it's had a profound effect on me. The whole concept, I have to admit, and somewhat, I don't know, if embarrassingly or maybe even, ashamed to say, but I had to adjust my thinking a little bit about what it means to be an elder. And I love the way that I now, because of your book and this conversation with you, I think of it in a far more positive light. And in fact, I think of it as a very necessary part of our society that we've neglected. And so one of the things I asked you to do in preparation as we were talking about what to discuss on this podcast, I said, think about this. If you had just 10 minutes to tell the world what you want to say about aging, what would you say? And you sent me something in writing that described one of the biggest quote unquote problems is that most people don't want to change. So now what we're talking about is becoming an elder, not just merely the importance of elders in our society, but what it means to become an elder. And what you went on to say was that as people grow older, they don't necessarily grow wiser, they just grow more so. What did you mean by that?
Oh, Brad, so easy just to keep on going the way we're going, becoming more and more adult, think the way we always did. There's an old saying about athletes. Everybody wants to win the Olympics and nobody wants to practice. The point is there's no natural way to become an elder. You really have to train yourself to do it. Becoming old, or elderly, if you will, is pretty much automatic. Our body does that, our mind does that. But to become an elder, you have to be moved by something. And unfortunately, the thing that moves most people to become elders is a whack up alongside the head. A loved one dies. You lose your job. You lose your home, a severe illness, a near-death experience. So all of a sudden, you're shaken to the core. And at that point, you're at a crossroads. You either say, okay, the heck with all that. I'm going back just the way it always is. I'm going to live a life of comfort and ease because I'm, after all, old. I deserve that. Or you can look at it and say, somewhere along the line, I quit. And I'm going to take it back up again. I'm going to live as big a life, a huge life, a committed life, an enthusiastic life, a life of joy and commitment to others. And that's a hard point. That's a fork in the road. And you don't really want to do it because it's unfamiliar and it's scary. And I think that's what it takes to generate the possibility of becoming an elder. And then you say, okay, I'm going to be an elder. Now what? Oh, dear. Well, how do I get endorsed? Well, there's no place to endorse you anymore. You're not of the tribe where you're endorsed as a wise one. So you have to do this really strange thing if you want to become an elder. First of all, you have to be moved by usually some crisis. Second of all, the way to become an elder nowadays is you stand in front of a mirror and you say out loud to that person in the mirror, I am an elder. And the mirror looks back and says, yeah, right. But you keep on saying it until the one in the mirror gets it. And finally, you realize I'm an elder because I took a stand to say so, and I hereby say so, I'm an elder. And unfortunately, at this point, you got to go out and get yourself a whole lot of training to become an elder. It's not easy to shift your whole point of view from the one you've had your entire adult life. You got to be really big and really committed to do that.
Almost sounds like you talk about this concept of elderhood as it being this enlightened club. How does one recognize either in somebody else, because in order to find those elders, we have to recognize them first. So how do we recognize either in somebody else or even in ourselves if we are progressing into elderhood or simply getting older? What are some, I mean, because that's a very important distinction. What are just, a couple of the things that come to mind as sort of characteristics or ways that one can know if they're progressing into elderhood?
Let me just preface it by saying elderhood is not a total function of being old. I know an elder who showed up at the age of 4. Another one showed up for me at the age of 13, and I listened to them because they trusted me and they talked openly, and I was blown away. Early elders, you don't see them very often, but sometimes it's almost as though we were born elders and we got it whacked out of us by the culture, where we had to know the right thing at the right time and do it the right way. And so so it's almost like we don't become elders. We unconceal that part of us that is elder. And you can hear sometimes other people speaking. And there's some shifts. If you can listen to it, there's a shift from doing to being. There's a shift from getting, like getting an education and all of just deserving, to giving. There's a shift from the I to we, and there's a shift. In other words, you become much more other-centered than this taking care of this wonderful producer and director and actor in my own life. You get to be bigger, and you start asking questions about things that you might have been totally certain about while you're an adult, but now you're not so sure. So if I were to summarize it into one way, it's we have to stop being so sure of what we already know and live in the possibility that maybe there's something that we don't know, and we're willing to ask and live in the question rather than the absolute answer.
I am inspired, increasingly inspired, the more we talk today. I was just making notes, and the term you used, we become other-centric, and that we're not becoming elder, but we're unconcealing what the things that have sort of covered up the elder within us. And some people may wonder why I'm doing a podcast about, aging and elderhood and everything that comes with that. I'm in my early 40s right now. So it was really interesting to hear what you said a moment ago about how we can be an elder at any age, because I want to be in tune with that myself right now, because even at this age, there's certain things we all struggle with as we get a little bit older, no matter whether that's 30s or 40s or 50s or what have you. And so we can all, no matter our age, take something away from what you're providing today in this podcast. So I'm grateful for that.
I want to stop you for just a moment, Brad, if I may, and I want to just talk to you a little bit. You're bringing tears to my eyes. And so I want to do something I've never done before. I want to tell you that I hear you as one elder to another. You may be 40, and I'm more than twice your age at this point, but I hear you, and I hear your commitment, and I hear your elderhood. So there's nobody else that's ever going to say this, but I hereby endorse you as an elder. Now, if you agree with that, mirror and damn well endorse yourself.
Well, thank you. Now you're bringing tears to my eyes. So that's a sign of a successful conversation. So thank you. I accept your endorsement. We have just a few more minutes here before we wrap up, and I want to go a little bit different direction, because in the bio I mentioned that you and your wife, Arlene, live in Stone Ridge Retirement Community in beautiful Mystic, Connecticut, which, by the way, is one of my favorite places. You know, I have had the opportunity myself to visit, I don't know, probably 130 or more retirement communities across the country as a part of my career at my life site. And some of the things that have been mentioned to me when I talk with residents, and I'll say, how do you like it here? Or what do you like most about living here? Or, are people here happy? The vast majority of people I talk to seem very, very happy. They seem grateful in so many ways, but I almost pick up on this sense that, I've heard people say, oh, he's kind of one of the complainers. She's one of the complainers. But I'm kind of, when I think about the conversation that we're having, and there's a strong connection between this idea of elderhood and positivity, and staying positive. And that doesn't mean we're not realistic, but we have to be positive. We have to be, try to be energetic and continue to improve in our lives. But what is it? What do you think this idea about whether we want to say complainers or whatever we want to say, what's that distinction, particularly as we are talking about the third stage of life, as you mentioned earlier? Some that I've met are so positive and so upbeat, and others just don't seem that way. And I'm sure there's a lot of psychology behind it, but what do you think drives these differences in attitudes?
Brad, that is a wonderful, wonderful question, and I'll take a crack at it. I think it's like which direction does the give flow? I talk to people who got a lot of standards, and the weather isn't quite right, and the furniture is wrong, and a bad color over there, and the food is, oh dear me. They've got standards, unfortunately, for themselves. And the environment is not meeting those standards like they think it should. Out of that, you get a lot of complaints because nobody's going to meet your standards. But the people that love it here, and I think most people do love it here, is that they begin to do things for other people. They see what needs to be done, and they just do it. And I think it's a directional thing like that. There's some people here that are just really still in their teenage years. Mom and dad are not doing enough for me. Oh, good grief, man. Give it a rest. But there's wonderful people here. And you can tell them because they have a sense of humor. There's something about the people that complain who think everything is so important because it didn't meet their standards, and they've lost their sense of humor about it. They don't get the joke somehow. Elders get the joke. We're here for a while, and then we disappear. And what are you going to do while you're here? You're either going to do everything to make it wonderful for yourself, or you're going to start doing some things to make it wonderful for others. And it's almost like, I don't know. It's like some people started being complainers when they're really, really young and never ever get over it. So,
well, that's true. And I kind of couched that question in the context of aging, and because of the retirement communities that I've visited and the comments that I've heard. But certainly that, I suppose that's a question obviously that could apply to any age. But for whatever reason, that's one of those things that just seems to come up, when I'm having those discussions with people at different retirement communities. So I'm always fascinated at that difference between attitudes that I see among different residents. Well, so thank you for your insight.
Can I throw one more little piece in here? Most of us, our entire life, have not really lived in community. We get into our cars and we have to go visit somebody that's not like right next door, and your uncle's right across the street, and your grandmother is just still down the road. We've lost all that. But this now is a chance for this to be, for our residents here, this is our last community. We have one last crack at it. And I think that's quite a wonderful thing. I like being in this.
That's a great point, and a great way to kind of wrap things up here is that some of what we just talked about and the complaints and so forth, Maybe because some of those folks just have not lived in community. And when you live in community, there has to be certain sacrifices. You have to recognize that not everything is going to be exactly the way you want it, because there's a whole community of people who may have different needs and desires. And so that sacrificial mindset is a very important part of being in community, right?
Yes, exactly. And there's another way I think we could say it. We can say that the I who I am and the I who I live as stops being this little bag of bones just sitting over here called Harvey, but the I becomes the community. The I becomes family. The I gets bigger when you're an elder.
Well, I hope as a result of our conversation today, more people will understand that and seek to live that. And so I know we've used our time. I want to thank you so much. This has been incredibly helpful to me personally, and I trust that it will be for our listeners as well. So thank you again for your time. Really appreciate it. And I wish you and your wife all the best and look forward to staying in touch with you.
Thank you so much. This has been utterly delightful, Brad. Thank you for your very insightful questions. It's been fun.